episode 1543 of No BS Job Search Advice Radio. I'm your host, Jeff Altman, the Big Game Hunter, and welcome. For 2019, I've been doing reprises of my interviews from Job Search Radio, and this is one of my favorites. It's an interview with Reverend Dr. Brian Ammons from Warren Wilson College. He's a friend, and we talk about finding meaningful work, finding work with purpose. Hope you enjoy this show. Hope you give it a great review. And I just want to remind you, these shows were recorded over phone lines, so the audio quality isn't as good as usual. I apologize, but that's the way I did it on that show at the very beginning. But the content here is fabulous. Now, let's get going.
My guest on this show is someone I've known personally for several years now. And we were part of a group having brunch on a Sunday not too long ago, and started to break off into a conversation that wound up being a discussion that turned into this show idea. It's really an opportunity for you to listen and think and explore the notion of finding purposeful work. Because for so many people I know, whether they're students who are about to graduate or adults who've been working in a profession for a long time, often what starts to happen is work becomes drudgery. And this is a show that's going to give you an idea of how to explore a different way, a world of work that I think you'll find more enjoyable. It's not an instant solution, but it's a good solution. So hang in there, listen to my conversation with Reverend Dr. Brian Ammons, and sing along.
Are you looking for a new job or interested in leveling up? Job Search Radio is your go-to resource for insider tips on job hunting and growing your career. Here's your host, Jeff Altman.
So my guest on this show is Reverend Dr. Brian Ammons, who joined Warren Wilson College in 2012 as the chaplain and director of spiritual life at the school. Prior to that, he served on the education faculty of Duke University and co-pastored Trinity's Place in Raleigh, North Carolina. Brian, welcome to Job Search Radio. Great to have you on board.
Thanks, Jeff. I really appreciate the invitation.
You're very welcome. So, Pastor, Reverend Doctor, how does someone with your background wind up being involved with job hunting in some way?
Well, you know, I think the spiritual path is always about looking for a meaningful life, and a big component of that is looking for meaningful work. Because of the context in which I serve now as a college chaplain, a lot of the conversations that I have are with undergrads who are trying to figure out what it means to step into the kind of work that they want to be doing as a part of a bigger conversation about what it means to live the kind of life that they want to live.
Beautiful. Do you think what you're going to be talking about will apply to experienced people as well, or do you think it should be just reserved for my student audience?
Oh, no, certainly. I think it has a much broader application. I think it's the same kind of conversation that I end up in often with staff and faculty folks, and at other points in my life with people across age ranges. My interest in this conversation is thinking about work as a component of a bigger life's project, and trying to figure out how do we work in ways that reflect sort of who we feel like we are trying to be in the world.
So students and adults alike all have this challenge, and I'm going to work with the assumption, and please correct me if I'm mistaken, this is not unique to one faith or another. This is an approach that can apply to those of any faith, any religion or non-faith. Am I correct about that?
Absolutely. And most wisdom traditions have some sort of vocabulary or set of tools or images to talk about these questions. But ultimately, the sort of process of discernment of centering and grounding and figuring out whether it be sort of follow energy or follow a sense of call, or I think shows up across traditions, and I think has a broad application for people who don't claim a particular tradition as well.
Beautiful. So how should someone start in this exploration?
So, the place where I go, and I tend to use the language of vocation, and the idea of vocation is grounded. I mean, the word is grounded in the Latin verb to call, so it has some sort of implication of calling. But I think our callings can be broad. We can be called from something outside of ourselves, or we can be called for our own deep truth and experience. So I tend to really play with this idea. I use a Venn diagram. So imagine three circles of our gifts, our passions, and the world's great need. For me, the journey is about sort of looking for that sweet spot where those three things intersect. So a lot of the time when I'm working one-on-one with folks, then those are the questions that I begin asking.
So could you restate those three overlapping circles again, just to make sure my listeners heard them?
Sure. So it's our gifts, our passions, and the world's great needs. And that kind of is spun off of a quotation from a theologian named Frederick Buechner. But the gifts, passions, and need, for those things come together as I think the place that we're looking for when you're looking at it, a sort of deep sense of vocation. And for me, my own work history has been pretty varied. In terms of my jobs have been pretty varied, but my work itself has actually been fairly consistent. I don't know if that makes sense, but I feel like I've been a part of the same project for the 20 years of my career, although the ways that I've done that have been, the ways I've approached that through specific jobs has been pretty different and pretty varied. So it's been a helpful thing for me.
Not everyone knows you as I do, so could you tell everyone, if you're comfortable with it, talking about some of your previous vocations and demonstrating how they might overlap?
So the way that I would say it is that my vocation has been fairly singular, which isn't the story for everyone, but it is for me. I have always been working with young people and companioning them around the intersection of education, spirituality, and social justice. Those themes have always been a part of my work. I started out as a middle school teacher. I served for a while as a youth minister. I served as an education faculty member in a secular context. I worked in a divinity school. I now work as a college chaplain. So throughout all of those spaces, though the jobs were really quite different, I also worked in higher ed administration for a while. The project was the same. Does that make sense?
It does to me, and I just want to repeat back what I'm hearing. So if I can explain it to you, I'm sure it'll give my listeners one more cut at understanding it if they're struggling. So in one way or another, the jobs may have been different, but the crux of them was the same, and that was providing an intersection for you between three strong beliefs that you hold, and providing service to students, younger individuals, etc., around social justice. I apologize, I don't have the other two written down. So
it was education and spirituality. So those things for me, I just kind of kept finding myself in those conversations. And even as a young man, as a teenager, I was sort of always engaged in those conversations. So for me, it's been like, it's that conversation that I can't not have. So my work, my life's project is going to be tied up in that conversation and that way of being in the world. The job then grows out of that. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And the question I then have is, how does someone start to sit down with themselves, to start coming to that awareness, whether they're a student in their late teens or early 20s, or someone my age, which is maybe a little older than that, and start thinking in that kind of way? How does someone approach that?
So one of the things that I do with folks is I encourage people to check in with themselves on a daily basis. So a really simple way of doing it. I'm not a great journaler. I know there are people that have all kinds of journaling practices. It's a hard thing for me to sustain. I can manage to write about 2 sentences. And one is so where did I feel really alive and awake today? What was that thing that brought me to the edge of my seat? And then where did I feel really drained or disconnected? And when I do that over time, then I start getting this sense of there's sort of a consistent set of stuff that I get excited about. So how do I pay attention to that? And that's a good way to point towards that part of those 3 intersecting circles that I started out with around where my passions are. When I'm trying to think about my gifts, I start asking other people that know me well to give me feedback. Where is it that you see, what is it that you see that I bring to the table? In higher education, that's part of our job is to help people see that. But I've been in other contexts and in other parts of my life where I invite that from my partner. I've invited that from coworkers. Say so what is it that I do well that I have to offer here? So those 2 pieces I think are the easier ones for me to get my head around. And then the third piece is figuring out sort of what's my context. And that for me was I consistently enjoy being in conversations with young people. There's a need for people who are interested and invested in being in conversation with young people. And I kept finding that was where I was drawn to. And while there's lots of other work in the world that I think is worth doing and that I'm really interested in, this is the piece that I keep coming home to. So when I started paying attention to that, where do I go home to? What both brings me to the edge of my seat and simultaneously feels like I'm in the groove? Then that was the place for me that feels like that's really my true vocation, my sort of sense of who I am in the world.
Beautiful. And folks, we'll be back with more from Reverend Dr. Ammons in just a moment. But first, my job search insider tip for this show, which is about using Facebook as part of your job search, which seems so bizarre given our conversation. But it's what I have prepared, folks. So one way, let me just simply say that I'm a believer that it's better to be found than to go out searching. And thus, in using Facebook to be found, there are a couple of techniques to use. And number one is find your profile on Facebook and complete your work in education. And the way you find it in the current version of Facebook is you click on your photo for Facebook and you'll see that there's a drop down and you'll figure it out from there. So you complete your work in education, add professional skills. Think in terms of skills that you'd want to be sought for if someone were trying to locate someone like you. And fill those in. Tell a little bit of a story as part of it. Then from there, make sure your current city is completed as part of it, because without that, how does anyone know where you are? You may be contacted about a job in L.A. and you live in, Bangor, Maine, and there's no point in that. Connect with companies that you're interested in is the next step in doing this. And in doing that, what you want to be doing is following them and start working at noticing who's there so you might start connecting with them as well. Take time in doing this part of it, because no one likes to be approached one day after accepting a connection request and being asked, "Hi, any jobs you can introduce me to?" It's just annoying. But again, my thought is you want to be the one contacted rather than being the contactor. And lastly, join groups. It's particularly related to your field or your industry or your skill set. There are groups on Facebook that recruiters hang out in, both corporate and third party, and they'll start noticing you there and start reaching out to you. So that's my tip for this show. There's a lot more information that you can watch, listen to, or read at my website, which is thebiggamehunter.us. Visit the site and go exploring. And while you're there, sign up for a complimentary subscription to my e-zine, No BS Job Search Advice e-zine, which I publish every other week with advice for job hunters that's good anywhere in the world. So let's pick up with Brian Ammons and continue where we left off. So we were using you as a model here, and you spoke about journaling as being one place where someone could start getting tuned into what it is within them that excites them, that provides them with passion. And my thinking as I heard that was, well, it's not just one time sitting down and writing. This is something that should go on over a period of time so that you start noticing patterns in where your attraction is. How long would you suggest someone might do this for before they start noticing something that's beyond simply the current fad and more of a life's purpose?
No, that's interesting. I encourage it as an ongoing regular practice, and I have some version of that check-in around those two questions. That I have done at different points in my life for extended periods of time, sometimes with a friend that I check in with answering those two questions, sometimes in journaling. I think patterns may emerge fairly quickly, like you may be able to see that in a few weeks. The question for me is then sort of, is that pattern that you can continue to confirm over long periods of time? It's interesting. I actually think Facebook can be a really pretty powerful way also to look at this, because part of what you've got in your Facebook profile, or part of what I've got in my Facebook profile, is a record of sort of where my life has been. So I can look back over the last few years as I flip through the story that I have been telling the world of myself. I can pay attention to what's the kind of stuff that I keep going back to, and I can see where the themes are. So to me, it feels like, it's not a quick and easy practice. It's not a quick, easy answer, but anything that we're doing that is helping us record sort of where our heart's desire is, where our joy is, where our passion is, over time can only serve to help us as we're trying to think through who is it and where do we fit. So one of the other things that I sometimes encourage people to do is to ask people who have known them for a long time to tell them the story of their lives. So if I go back to my, I've got a trusted friend and mentor that has been in my life for about 20 years. And when I go to and chat with him and say, so tell me, when did you see me most alive? Then that's the kind of feedback that draws us into this conversation.
Cool. And you also spoke about gifts earlier. In that conversation with a mentor or ally or close friend, is that where you start exploring the gifts conversation, or would you recommend it being done a different way?
I think that's a great place to start with the people that know you. I think actually work colleagues are often the people that know best. The people that I work most closely with here on campus know that I'm never the good note taker. I'm pretty good at the big picture question. I'm pretty good at figuring out, like, here's something that we need to address. Figuring out the multiple steps to get there isn't always my strong suit. And I've learned some of that because there's other people that are working close relationship with me that step into those roles because they know that that's not the place that I'm strongest. So that's where I get some of that feedback initially. And of course, always there's all kinds of, strength inventories and those kinds of things I think can be really useful in figuring out those questions.
Do you recommend any particular skills inventory approach, or is it just completely open-ended in your mind?
There's some of that ends up being somewhat field-specific, I think. So there's some that, I think Strength Finder is good for getting some basic vocabulary. I use the Enneagram a lot, which is, there's Myers-Briggs inventories. Those kinds of things I think are always helpful for us to figure out something about our temperament and what skills are likely to grow out of our temperaments. But there's a whole plethora of tools out there.
Enneagram, is that ENEAGRAM?
2 N's. ENN. Yep. And it's a tool that's used often by spiritual directors. There's some psychologists that are using it. And it's another sort of archetypal typology kind of thing. It has 9 types, whereas the Myers-Briggs has 16, and it's based in some slightly different questions, but it's a similar sort of tool.
So from there, we have the question of world's greatest need.
Mm-hmm.
That's a biggie too.
Yeah, and I would say world's great need, because there are we don't all have to go after the singular greatest need. So the way that I would think about this is, so if I'm following my gifts and my passions, let's say that I'm really good at crossword puzzles and I'm passionate about crossword puzzles, the world only needs so many people that are good at and passionate about crossword puzzles, right? So it might not be my that sweet spot of my vocation, unless I'm Will Shortz. So if I'm looking for something, it's sort of, where do my gifts and passions become relevant in this bigger context? And that to me is, again, paying attention to where am I useful? Where can I make a contribution to the world? And I think that happens in business context. It certainly happens in nonprofit and education sectors. So trying to find that place. And to me, often that gets to be sort of a blurry line for what am I passionate about and what does the world need? Because those things always seem like they're in conversation for me. I don't know if that's true for everyone. That's definitely true in my case.
So when I think about world's great need and how someone explores that, an individual may only have a limited vision of possibility. It sounds like something that, again, in talking with friends, allies, recruiters, coaches, any number of individuals, you start compiling information about possibilities and then have to go off exploring to see how exciting someone may actually be, because it could be completely different than what they envision for themselves.
That's right. That's right. And, I think that's the place where the vocational journey continues to open up. Because, we may find ourselves aware of a need that we had no idea was there. I grew up going to public schools. I went to university in a state school. I didn't have a chaplain in my college experience. And if you had ever asked me, ever told me that college chaplaincy was what I was headed towards, I wouldn't have even really known or understood what that role might be. And over time, things continued to unfold that I became clear that there was that these things that I had this passion and gifts for, and that I really felt like there was a need for people to stand with young people in their spiritual journeys. I didn't really have language to articulate it until I kept talking to other people that were doing work that sounded kind of like what I wanted to be doing. So I think a lot of stuff for me always happens. A lot of our sense of purpose gets revealed in conversations with community, in communities. And so I really encourage being bold and talking to folks about saying, this is the kind of thing I feel like I want to do. What kind of job might land me there?
Fascinating. And I hesitated there because I wanted more. I was hoping there was a little bit more there, because it's just such an enormous topic at that point to start thinking about where are the possibilities for someone given their particular strengths and given their passions. Folks, this isn't, excuse my slang here, a one-trick pony. This is
no, it's not.
This is something that takes time and care. And for those of you who are actively looking for a job, this will probably transcend the current job search. It's important for you to get back to work, but Dr. Ammons' approach here is to approach it as a life's purpose. And for now, get a job. Find yourself back at work, and then start taking the time, because you may find your calling here within this next job. And
that's right, and often for me, like there was a time where I was working as a scholarships administrator in a university setting, and I realized about 9 months into it that I was in somebody else's dream job. And it wasn't mine. But that became incredibly instructive for me to figure out, so what is it about this that has so many things that sounds like the kind of thing that I want to be doing? What is it about this that isn't fitting? And that became useful as well. And so that shaped my next job search. So this really is a lifelong approach. It's a way of thinking about work as integrated into a bigger life story. And I would also say, within my religious tradition, we have this. There's an image that folks that come out of Christian traditions often refer to when we're talking about vocation as tent making, and it comes from the story of one apostle who managed to do the work that he felt like it was his life's work as he was going around and starting these new communities, founding new communities. But as he moved from town to town, what he did was he made and repaired tents. And that's how he paid the bills, so that he could keep doing what his life's work until his life's work was enough that it could be really the thing that sustained him and was ultimately what supported his living, when he had enough patrons that could help keep him doing his life work full time. So I think that's always an important piece. Yes, go to work. Get a job. There'll be things that you'll learn about your gifts and your passions and the world's great needs in any job. So get out there and work, and continue to think about it in this larger picture of who do I want to be in the world and how do I want to live in the world.
So when you think about someone that you've counseled in recent past and their particular journey with this, without identifying who they are, who comes to mind in your mind, and could you tell everyone their story without revealing anything confidential, of course?
Sure. It's a little bit tricky for me just because of the context of my work. The conversation that I was in most recently was with an undergrad student who is coming into her last year of school and is trying to figure out next options and whether or not she wants to go out and work in the nonprofit sector for a while, go to grad school, what kind of grad school she wants to go to. And she's someone that I've been actually in conversation with for several years now.
Catch that one, folks, several years. Please continue.
That's right. Right. So I've known her now for over 3 years. And she popped in my office and had a moment. The story she told me was that she was on a bus, and she was overhearing a conversation between a friend of hers and a stranger on the bus that she felt like she wanted to participate in, and she wasn't fully equipped to be able to engage it directly. Now, for her, this was a conversation that was about sort of religion and politics and culture. And so she had this moment of clarity of going, I want to be the person that can come into this conversation well. So what are the steps for me about becoming that person? Because I get that that's who it is that I want to be in the world. And have this moment of real clarity that for her is translating into sort of next in graduate school. About how do I become the person that's prepared to engage this particular conversation. And she just had this moment that something shifted from thinking about all of the possibilities to going like, oh, this just feels like the next step for me. And part of the reason I think she was tuned into that shift is because of the kind of conversations she's been having in the last 3 years. That say, pay attention. When you're in that point where you come to the edge of your seat, where you feel energized and you also feel like you drop fully into yourself, that's something to pay attention to, and it speaks to us. So it wasn't like a big burning bush moment, but rather a single moment that reflected years of conversation and years of exploration.
It's funny, you referred to it as a burning bush moment. I thought it was an aha moment.
Yeah. That's right. That's right.
Yet the example is a wonderful illustration of how simple that moment can be, where you have that awakening from all the disparate thoughts and delusions you may have, and the clarity becomes obvious.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
It doesn't have to be hard.
Just a point. Yeah. And I will say,
it's from all the work that you did previously.
That's right. And for me, I mean, when I came into this job, which I will say this is the first time I've entered into a job without an exit plan. As you can tell just from the bits that I've told, I've had a lot of jobs. And they've all been dancing around it, getting closer. And something happened for me when I read this job posting that I was so clear. I was like, oh, that's my work. This is the job that makes everything else in my resume make sense, where I get to show up and bring all of it with me. I'm really grateful to have that. Not everybody gets that in one job. And I also had 20 years of work before I got here that felt like it was all over the place. So it's just like each experience just peels back another layer for me that starts to get me closer to the thing of saying, oh, this is who it is that I'm trying to be. This is what it is that I'm trying to do. And here's the job that will allow me to live out that greater sense of purpose.
You're an overnight sensation 20 years later.
Exactly. And I'm grateful for every step of the journey, even the jobs that I hated.
Perfectly put. Brian, thank you so much for making time. I really appreciate it. I'm sure my audience did as well.
Always great to talk with you, Jeff.
So that's today's show. I hope you found it helpful. And if you did, here are a few more ways to get more from me. First of all, visit my website, which is thebiggamehunter.us. I have more than 6,000 blog posts there that you can watch, listen to, or read that will help you find your next job. If you want the best of my advice, join JobSearchCoachingHQ.com, where I've curated information with a focus on interviewing. If you decide to take the lifetime membership at the site, it's $299 currently, but that's the price of a coaching session or an hour of coaching from me, and I'll be giving that to you if you join with a lifetime membership. Have a few questions? Contact me through the Magnify app for iOS or PrestoExperts.com, where you can call me. Schedule a specific time with me through chat on Magnify or by connecting with me on LinkedIn at linkedin.com/IN/The Big Game Hunter. Once we're connected on LinkedIn, you can message me about coaching you, scheduling a time for Magnify or Presto Experts, speak with me about a resume or LinkedIn profile critique, help you with a salary negotiation or my trusted advisor services, and much, much more. Like you, I don't work for free. I do charge for what I do. You can take my classes on Skillshare and become a premium member using the link in the show notes and receive 2 months for free instead of just the one that the site offers. Skillshare offers thousands and thousands of courses, not just simply mine, on a host of different subjects that can help you in many different ways. Lastly, join my group on Facebook called Career Angles. It's free to the first 250 people who join and is focused on helping you do better at work. Information is shared daily, and we're attempting to build a supportive group there. Ask to join. I'm not letting recruiters in at this point. So I'll be back tomorrow with more. And in the meantime, I hope you have a great day. Be great.